this past week concluded almost a 2-year-long process. And this process has a name called the Amazon Synod. And this was a process in the church. And if you're not familiar with what a synod in the church is, a synod comes about when there's an issue going on in the church, usually of pastoral nature. For instance, in the Amazonian regions of South America, there's an immense problem down there where numerous of the faithful, thousands upon thousands of the faithful Catholics down there, don't have access to the Eucharist. Right? Think about that. We get to come to church and get to see the Eucharist if we want every single day. They go months. There are regions in the Amazonian regions of South America, they go months and months without even seeing or receiving or having the ability to receive the Eucharist. And so when there's a problem like this, oftentimes the Holy Father, in this case Pope Francis, called a synod to begin study and to begin kind of hearing all the ideas, both from bishops, priests, lay people, theologians, lay Catholics, just trying to compile a whole bunch of ideas in order to try and figure out, is this a solvable problem and what are we going to do going forward? And so that meeting, the synod, actually happened throughout the month of October in Rome. And in the year and a half or so leading up to it, hearing all the ideas, one of the ideas that rose to the top and that was very much so on the table was the solution of perhaps doing away with priestly celibacy for certain qualified men in the Amazonian region. And the reason that idea became so prevailing is because in many of those regions in South America, there's a great stigma against men who are not married and who do not have children. And so it's a cultural thing that men are very much so discouraged from pursuing a vocational life in the priesthood because they'll be stigmatized. And so we were down in that region of the world, we are losing many good men because of this practice, this law of priestly celibacy. And so when that idea emerged in that it was going to be entertained, there was a great amount of ink and conversation that kind of happened around this, and lots of hopes of people were kind of building up expectations that finally, just maybe, this window of priestly celibacy will be cracked in the Amazon region, and it'll only be a matter of time before we can throw open that window entirely to the Church Universal and just do away with this weird practice of priestly celibacy. Finally, maybe, just maybe, priests will be able to marry. And as I said, this week, that whole process kind of concluded with our Holy Father, Pope Francis, issuing his concluding document of the Amazon Synod. And in that document, Pope Francis did not issue a call, did not issue forth a call changing anything in the church, changing anything about priestly celibacy. Rather, he re-emphasized the call to profoundly grow in holiness. Nothing changed. Do not think, says our Lord, do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish, but to fulfill. Until heaven and earth pass away, not the smallest letter of the law or even the smallest part of a letter of the law will pass away. How many of us have been in that place where we have thought and hoped and may have perhaps talked about and voiced that maybe, just maybe finally the church will change its thinking on this teaching or on that practice, on this belief or on that moral tenet. And we have probably all been there at one point or another. And maybe, just maybe, the church will change in this way. And that is not something that is new. That hope, that desire, that anticipation, that expectation is not new. The people that our Lord is speaking to in today's gospel felt the exact same thing all the way back in the first century. Our Lord today is giving the greatest homily of all time, his Sermon on the Mount. We're right in the middle of his, or at the very beginning, of his Sermon on the Mount. And the whole reason he gives these teachings today is because people have great expectations. They're anticipating finally, just maybe, the burdens of the law and the prophets as taught to us, enforced upon us by the Pharisees, maybe, just maybe, it'll finally change. But what does our Lord say? I have not come to abolish the law. Not a single letter of the law, not a single part of the smallest letter of the law will pass away. And in fact, what our Lord ends up doing in this Sermon on the Mount is through his great law of love, he makes the law even harder. It is even more burdensome now. He's calling us back to that original holiness, prelapsarian or prior to the fall of Adam and Eve, that original holiness that we enjoyed and that we are called to. It's not just that we are not allowed to go around and murder each other. We know that. We accept that. But now we can't even be angry with our brother. We can't say a bad word about our sister. It's not that we can go around or can't go around any longer and commit adultery. We know that. We accept that. But now we can't even commit adultery in our hearts. Lusting after another is now tantamount to the sin of adultery. Divorce. Our Lord is saying, we can't even divorce unless the marriage is unlawful. Because now we cannot tear apart what God brought together, what God created in the sacrament of marriage. He has just made it harder. He has dashed the hopes of his followers, and he has made it even harder. And it does feel at times, right, that the laws, the beliefs, the rules of our faith, it feels at times like they shackle us, right? That they forcibly kind of take away our freedom. I don't get to do what I want. I can't believe what I want. I have to think this way. It sometimes feels like that. But that's what our faith does. That's what the law and the prophets, that's what our Lord calls us to. It feels like he's forcibly handcuffing us and taking away our freedom. And of course, that's not true at all. Our Lord never removes our freedom, even if it feels like it does. But the law does bind us. But it does so not in a forcible, imprisoning way. It does so in a gentle way, invitationally. And we all know, right, that we can walk away from this at any time. We have the freedom to do so, and I'm not advocating that. Do not walk away. Do not walk away. But conceptually, we know, right, that we have the freedom to walk away. So even the sense sometimes that it feels like our faith is shackling us is not true. We can walk away at any time. But what our Lord is doing with the law, with the prophets, what our Lord is doing in the Sermon on the Mount, is binding us in a gentle way. And he's doing it more in a sheltering way. And he's saying, stay in the shelter. Stay on this path that I have set before you through the law, through the prophets, through the coming of my Son, Jesus Christ. Stay in the confines of this. Because as we heard in our first reading, that path, that shelter that gently binds us, leads us and gives us, as we heard in the Sirach reading, life and goodness. It gives us life and goodness. And on either side or outside that shelter are evil and death. Our Lord is not shackling us. He is binding us because he loves us, and he does so gently to protect us, to preserve us. No doubt we have all been in that place where we have hoped and we have wished, we have wanted, we have talked about, what if the church just changed in this way or these 10 ways? G.K. Chesterton once wrote that we should not want a church that changes with the world. We should want a church that changes the world. We should not want a church that changes with the world. We should want a church that changes the world itself. And how does this happen? It happens through you and I, the actors of God's grace in the world. And this is not a homily saying, don't question. Don't question church teaching, or don't question church practices or our Lord and his law. But there is a right way to question, and there is a wrong way, a very bad way to question. Sometimes we question from a standpoint of laziness. And I'm susceptible to that just as anyone is. From a standpoint of laziness, that we issue forth this question or this statement without really understanding why the church or our Lord teaches this way. And guys, the fact of the matter is, in the 21st century, we have more catechetical or resources at our hands that can teach us the why of our faith. We have more resources at our fingertips than any generation before us. It is a matter of sitting down and doing some research. That's it. Our parishes pay $1,500 a year for Formed. That's all we have to do is sit down, and when we ask that question, to then try and understand with vigor why the church teaches what she teaches. And that is one aspect, laziness, of a bad way to question the way things are, the way we believe in the church. The second way is through pride. It is not a good idea to question our Lord and his bride, the church, in a prideful way. And how does that look? And again, I do this quite often. We can question things on the assumption that there is no way that my way of thinking, my desires, my preferences, there is no way that I am wrong. The church is wrong. Our Lord is wrong. That must be the problem. The way to question is with vigor, in seeking the answers we ask, and with humility. Being very open and conscientiously so that I may be wrong. That maybe it's not the church or our Lord that needs to change. Maybe it is the hearts of humanity that must change. Because as our Lord says, I have not come to abolish the law. Not a single letter of the law, not a single part of the letter of the law will pass away. Maybe there are good reasons, and there are. For every teaching, there are reasons founded in divine revelation and fully explained through natural human reason. We are not a faith that believes blindly in anything. We have a reason for everything we believe. We are not fundamentalists. We are Catholics. There is a reason for everything we believe. So the way to question is through vigorous research, humility, or, as our Holy Father said, he did not issue forth a call for change in the church. He issued forth a call for growth in holiness. When we find ourselves in that place, just like those sitting in front of our Lord in the gospel today, let our prayer be, Lord, help me to pursue holiness. Help me to change my heart.